In a small Ohio diner, a single word scrawled on a napkin changes everything. Socorro. A desperate plea for help from a woman who's seen too much, who knows secrets that powerful men would kill to keep buried. When Jack Turner, a scarred ex-firefighter with his own tragic past, sees that napkin, he has no idea that his simple act of kindness will unravel a conspiracy that claimed his own daughter's life. What begins as a breathless escape from ruthless pursuers becomes a heart-wrenching journey through betrayal, loss, and impossible choices. As Clara and Jack race against time to expose the truth about illegal medical experiments performed on terminally ill children, they discover that their connection runs deeper than either could have imagined, bound together by the same tragedy from opposite sides. Will they survive long enough to bring justice to those who have been silenced forever? If you're watching this, follow our channel now for more gripping stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Like this video and comment where you're watching from. We read every comment and love connecting with you. The sound of coffee percolating mingled with the clinking of ceramic mugs and the gentle murmur of patrons. Maple Diner, tucked away in a small town in Ohio, vibrated with everyday conversations on this frigid December morning. The windows had fogged up, creating a barrier between the warmth inside and the snow silently accumulating on the sidewalk outside. Christmas decorations hung from the ceiling, a bit too early for some, but a welcome sight for most in this close-knit community. At table 12, however, sat a blonde woman who hadn't touched her coffee. She'd been stirring it for nearly 10 minutes, the spoon making small rhythmic circles against the ceramic. Her eyes were puffy and ringed with red, mascara slightly smudged at the corners. Her hands trembled visibly each time she lifted the spoon, then returned it to the endless stirring motion. Clara Williams, 32 years old, administrative assistant at Turner Bioresearch for the past 3 years, mother to none, wife to none. And today, possibly witness to something no one should ever see. The weight of what she knew pressed against her chest, making each breath feel like she was drowning. She glanced nervously toward the door every time the bell jingled, announcing a new customer. Her gaze lingered a moment too long on a man in a dark suit who had entered moments ago, sitting at a corner booth with a perfect view of her table. She recognized him immediately, Robert's security detail. Which meant Robert himself wasn't far behind. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as her fingers wrapped around a napkin. With trembling hands, she reached for a pen in her purse. A simple ballpoint, the kind that costs nothing, but in this moment, it was the most important tool she possessed. She hesitated for only a second before writing a single word across the thin paper in bold, desperate letters. Help. No, not strong enough. She crossed it out and wrote again. Socorro. The Portuguese word for help, something her Brazilian grandmother had taught her as a child. A word that might catch someone's attention without being immediately obvious to English-only observers. She pushed the napkin discreetly to the edge of the table, praying someone would notice. Anyone. At the adjacent table sat Jack Turner, a former firefighter, whose face bore the marks of his last rescue, scars stretching from his right temple down to his jaw, a permanent reminder of the night that took everything from him. 3 years ago, he would have jumped at the chance to help a stranger. Now he just wanted to finish his black coffee and disappear back into his solitary existence, until he saw it. The reflection in the window beside him caught the word written on the napkin. Socorro! He recognized it instantly, a word he'd learned during a rescue mission in a predominantly Brazilian neighborhood in Boston. His coffee cup froze midway to his lips. Jack watched the woman's reflection, the fear in her eyes, the way she kept glancing toward the man in the suit, the slight tremble in her shoulders that most wouldn't notice, but that Jack, trained to spot people in distress, recognized immediately. Against his better judgment, he set down his coffee and stood up. 3 steps, and he was beside her table. He leaned down, his voice barely above a whisper. Do exactly as I say, and don't look back. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected anyone to understand, let alone respond. She gripped her mug tighter, knuckles turning white, fighting back tears that threatened to spill at this small act of kindness. The suited man at the corner booth noticed the interaction, his hand sliding subtly inside his jacket. Jack caught the movement in his peripheral vision. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, a sensation that had saved his life more than once. "Your life is in danger, isn't it?" Jack whispered, pretending to adjust his jacket while discreetly dropping a small note into Clara's lap. "Cough when I do. Go to the bathroom. I'll follow." Clara gave an almost imperceptible nod, her eyes fixed on her coffee cup. Behind the counter, Emily Martinez, the young waitress, observed the strange interaction. Deaf since age 8 after a severe case of meningitis, she couldn't hear the exchange. But 15 years of reading body language told her something was very wrong. The blonde woman's posture screamed fear. The scarred man's movements were calculated, protective. And the man in the suit, Emily had seen that look before. The cold, predatory gaze of someone watching prey. Emily's fingers moved nervously over the counter, tapping out a rhythm only she could feel, a habit from her music lessons before she lost her hearing. She caught Clara's eye for just a moment, and a silent understanding passed between them. Jack returned to his table, laid down a $20 bill that far exceeded his $3.50 coffee, and waited. Exactly 90 seconds later, he coughed, a sharp, deliberate sound. Clara rose shakily, clutching her purse to her chest, and walked toward the restrooms at the back of the diner. The suited man immediately stood, dropping his untouched coffee. Emily, watching this unfold, made a split-second decision. She picked up a tray loaded with plates and glasses and accidentally stumbled, sending everything crashing to the floor with a cacophony that startled everyone in the diner. Everyone except herself. In the momentary chaos, Jack slipped away from his table and followed Clara's path toward the bathroom, while the suited man was temporarily blocked by the mess of broken dishes and spilled coffee. "I'm so sorry," Emily signed and spoke simultaneously, deliberately positioning herself between the suited man and the hallway to the restrooms. The emotional camera of the narrative zooms in on the napkin, still sitting on the table, now slowly absorbing a drop of spilled coffee. The ink begins to bleed, but the desperate plea remains clear. Socorro. The first thread of a web that would soon entangle them all had been spun. Clara's trembling hands fumbled with the bathroom door lock. The small women's restroom of Maple Diner suddenly felt like both a prison and sanctuary, its mint green walls closing in on her as her breathing came in short, painful gasps. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to dance mockingly across the tiled floor. She caught her reflection in the mirror, mascara streaked down her cheeks, blonde hair disheveled, eyes wide with terror. For a moment, she didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. 3 weeks ago, she had been just another administrative assistant. Now she was running for her life. The door handle jiggled, and Clara pressed her back against the wall, a scream building in her throat. Relief flooded through her when Jack slipped inside, quickly locking the door behind him. His scarred face looked even more severe in the bathroom's unflattering light, but his eyes held a steadiness that anchored her spiraling panic. "We have maybe 2 minutes," he whispered, checking the small window above the toilet, too small for either of them to fit through. "That man outside, he's not just any security guard, is he?" Clara shook her head as tears finally escaped, streaming down her face. "He works for Robert Turner, my boss." Her voice cracked on the word boss, as though it contained a hidden meaning. "But it's not just that. He knows something that could destroy my entire life." Jack's expression hardened at the name Turner, though Clara was too distraught to notice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal an old firefighter's badge. The metal was tarnished, and the edges of the ID card were frayed, but the name Jackson Turner was still clearly visible beside a younger, unscarred face. "I've seen that look before," he said quietly, tucking the badge away. "The look of someone who waited too long to ask for help. I've pulled people from burning buildings who had that same expression, people who thought they could handle the danger until it was almost too late." His voice took on a haunted quality. "Trust me, I know when someone's running out of time." Clara wiped her tears with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara further. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Jack's gaze drifted to the small butterfly tattoo on Clara's wrist, identical to one his daughter had gotten on her 16th birthday. The coincidence felt like a message from a past he couldn't outrun. "Let's just say I recognize a burning building when I see one," he replied cryptically. Outside the bathroom door, they heard footsteps approaching, heavy, deliberate steps that echoed against the diner's linoleum floor. Clara's breath caught, and Jack pressed a finger to his lips. The footsteps stopped right outside. The handle turned slowly, meeting the resistance of the lock. Then came 3 sharp knocks. "Housekeeping," a male voice called with mock cheerfulness. "Just checking if everything's okay in there." Clara and Jack remained frozen in silence, barely breathing. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated slightly, but Jack sensed the man hadn't gone far. Suddenly, a different sound caught their attention, a rapid tapping against the door. When Jack cautiously cracked it open, Emily, the deaf waitress, stood there, her eyes wide with urgency. She pointed down the hallway, then to the exit sign, her gestures frantic. In her hand, she held a set of keys with a small green dinosaur keychain. Emily's fingers moved quickly in sign language. Though Jack didn't understand all of it, the message was clear enough. "Danger, exit, hurry." "She's trying to help us," Jack whispered. "She's showing us another way out." Emily thrust the keys into Jack's hand and gestured again, pointing to herself, then mimicking driving a car. She pointed to a small piece of paper with an address hastily scribbled on it. Jack nodded in understanding. "She's offering her car, smart girl." As if on cue, a crash came from the front of the diner, loud enough that even Clara heard several patrons gasp. Emily smiled knowingly. She had created another diversion. "Now," Jack said, grabbing Clara's hand. "Stay close." They slipped out of the bathroom, following Emily through a narrow service hallway that smelled of grease and industrial cleaning products. Steam from the kitchen made the air thick and visibility poor, perfect cover for their escape. They reached a metal door with peeling red paint that opened into the alley behind the diner. The bitter December air hit them like a physical force as they emerged into the narrow alleyway. Snow had begun to fall again, thick flakes swirling in the wind. Emily pointed to an old blue Honda Civic parked beside the dumpsters, then pressed the address paper into Clara's hand more firmly, squeezing her fingers in silent support. "Thank you," Clara whispered, knowing Emily couldn't hear but would understand the sentiment. Emily nodded, tapped her own heart, then pointed to both of them before hurrying back inside. Jack unlocked the car, and they climbed in quickly, their breath forming small clouds in the freezing interior. The engine sputtered reluctantly to life. "He'll be looking for your car," Jack said, carefully navigating out of the alley. "This buys us some time." As they pulled onto the main street, Clara saw the suited man burst from the front of the diner, phone pressed to his ear. Their eyes met through the falling snow for just an instant, and the cold calculation in his gaze sent shivers down her spine. "They're together," she could read his lips saying into the phone. "Find her car." Jack made a sharp turn onto a side street, putting buildings between them and the man's predatory gaze. Clara clutched the dashboard, knuckles white. "I didn't think he'd find me so quickly," she whispered. "I was careful. I used cash, stayed off main roads." "Whoever he is, he's not just some corporate security," Jack said grimly, checking the rearview mirror. "Those are hunter's eyes." "What exactly did you see at that company, Clara?" Clara looked down at her hands, which hadn't stopped trembling since she wrote that desperate plea for help. The weight of what she knew pressed on her like a physical burden. "Something I wasn't supposed to see," she finally answered. "Something that made me understand why people disappear." Snow continued to fall outside, erasing their tracks as they drove away from Maple Diner, away from the life Clara had known, and toward an uncertain sanctuary suggested by a waitress who had recognized terror when she saw it, even in silence. Neither of them noticed the black sedan that pulled out from 3 blocks behind, keeping a careful distance as it followed the blue Civic through the gathering storm. Snow fell in thick, hypnotic curtains across the windshield of Emily's blue Honda Civic. The wipers fought a losing battle against the accumulation, creating brief windows of visibility before the white powder reclaimed its territory. The heater wheezed and coughed, barely keeping pace with the plummeting temperature outside. Jack gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, his scarred face illuminated intermittently by passing streetlights as they left the small Ohio town behind. Route 33 stretched before them like a silver ribbon through the darkness, empty save for the occasional semi-truck barreling through the storm. The radio crackled with static between Christmas songs, the cheerful melodies a stark contrast to the tension filling the small car. Clara sat hunched in the passenger seat, her blonde hair falling forward to hide her face. She had stopped crying, but her breathing remained shallow and quick. Her right hand clutched the door handle as if ready to flee, though there was nowhere to run in the vast whiteness surrounding them. "You need to tell me what's happening," Jack said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since they'd left the diner. "Who exactly is after you and why?" Clara's gaze remained fixed on the road ahead. "You won't believe me. Or worse, you will." "Try me," Jack replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "I've seen things that would make most people's nightmares seem tame." Clara shifted in her seat, finally turning to look at him. The blue glow from the dashboard cast eerie shadows across her face, making her appear ghostly and ethereal. "Robert Turner," she began, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "My boss. He runs Turner Bioresearch. On paper, they develop pharmaceuticals for rare childhood diseases." She paused, swallowing hard. "But what they're really doing—" Her words trailed off as Jack suddenly tensed, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Headlights had appeared behind them, cutting through the snow with unusual brightness. "How long have they been there?" Clara whispered, following his gaze. "Too long," Jack muttered, pressing the accelerator slightly. The headlights matched their speed perfectly, maintaining the same distance. "And those aren't standard headlights. They're high-intensity LEDs, the kind used by private security," Clara finished, her face draining of color. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd seen those same lights in his own rearview mirror 3 years ago, the night everything changed. "Hold on," he said, suddenly swerving the car onto a narrow side road nearly hidden by snowdrifts. The Honda fishtailed dangerously before Jack regained control, the tires finding purchase on the slick surface. The road narrowed further, canopied by snow-laden pine branches that scraped the roof of the car. Behind them, the pursuing vehicle hesitated at the turnoff, its headlights swinging wide before aligning with the hidden road. "They're still coming," Clara said, her voice rising with panic. "I know these back roads," Jack replied, his focus entirely on the treacherous driving conditions. "Used to come fishing out here with my—" He stopped abruptly, as if the memory caused physical pain. Clara noticed the abrupt silence but didn't press. Instead, her attention was drawn to the glove compartment, which had popped open during their sharp turn. Inside lay a worn photograph, a woman with auburn hair laughing, her arm around a young girl with the same coloring. They stood before a lake, fishing rods in hand, their smiles radiating happiness so tangible it seemed to leap from the faded paper. "Your family?" Clara asked softly. Jack glanced at the photo briefly, a muscle in his jaw twitching. He simply nodded, reaching over to shut the glove compartment with perhaps more force than necessary. "I lost them," he said after a long moment, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Because of a man exactly like your boss, someone who thought his money and power put him above consequences." Clara stared at his profile, suddenly seeing the scars in a new light. They weren't just physical markers of a firefighting accident, but symbols of something deeper, wounds that had never truly healed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words feeling wholly inadequate. Jack didn't acknowledge her sympathy. Instead, he made another sudden turn onto what appeared to be little more than a deer trail, barely visible through the increasingly heavy snowfall. The car bounced violently over hidden roots and rocks, the suspension groaning in protest. "If you don't feel safe telling me what you know, that's fine," Jack said, navigating the treacherous path with surprising skill. "But I need to know what we're up against. How far will these people go?" Clara's hand went instinctively to her purse, where a small USB drive lay hidden in a secret compartment. "They'll kill for what I have," she said quietly. "They already have." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy and ominous. Jack's hands tightened further on the steering wheel, his knuckles nearly translucent with the pressure. A distant sound caught their attention, the low, powerful rumble of an engine, different from the sedan that had been following them. Jack cut the headlights, plunging them into darkness broken only by the faint bluish glow of snow reflecting moonlight. "What are you doing?" Clara hissed, her heart rate spiking. "Listen," Jack commanded. In the silence, the sound grew clearer. A helicopter, its rotors slicing through the snowy night. The mechanical whump, whump, whump grew louder. Then a searchlight cut through the forest canopy less than a mile behind them, sweeping methodically across the trees. "They're not just looking for you," Jack said grimly. "They're hunting you." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "How is this possible? I only took the files 3 days ago." Jack killed the engine and turned to her, his expression deadly serious. "Whatever you found, it's worth more than just money to them." The helicopter's searchlight swept closer, illuminating snowflakes in brilliant white columns that penetrated the forest. Jack restarted the car and accelerated down the rough path, branches scraping against the windows like desperate fingers trying to hold them back. "There's a hunting cabin about 2 miles ahead," he said, navigating by memory and instinct rather than visibility. "If we can make it there, we can hide the car and wait them out." The distant thrum of the helicopter was joined by another sound, the growl of engines on the road they'd left behind. Clara closed her eyes briefly, fighting against the tide of hopelessness threatening to drown her. "You don't have to help me," she said suddenly. "You could drop me off, save yourself." "You don't even know me." Jack's eyes met hers for a brief moment, something unreadable flickering in their depths. "I know enough," he said simply, "and I know what happens when good people stand by while monsters operate in the shadows." The car crested a small hill, and Jack cut the engine again, letting momentum carry them silently down the other side. At the bottom of the incline stood a small, weathered cabin, nearly invisible against the surrounding pines. "We're here," he whispered, as the helicopter's searchlight swept over the ridge they'd just descended, missing their position by mere yards. In the darkness of the car, with danger circling above and behind them, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in days, a fragile, tenuous hope. Whatever came next, she was no longer facing it alone. The hunting cabin loomed before them, a dark silhouette against the snow-laden forest. Jack guided Clara through knee-deep drifts, their breaths forming ghostly clouds that dissipated into the frigid night air. The helicopter's rhythmic thumping had faded into the distance, but both knew the reprieve was temporary. The hunters would not abandon their prey so easily. With practiced movements, Jack retrieved a key from beneath a frost-covered rock near the porch steps. The metal felt like ice against his fingers as he worked the stiff lock. The door finally swung open with a plaintive creak, revealing absolute darkness within. "Stay close," he whispered, pulling a small flashlight from his jacket pocket. The weak beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dancing dust motes and cobwebs that hung from exposed rafters like tattered lace. Clara stepped inside, her entire body trembling, not just from the cold, but from the weight of exhaustion and fear that had settled into her bones. The cabin smelled of old wood, forgotten summers, and something earthy that reminded her of her grandfather's tool shed. In the beam of Jack's flashlight, she could make out sparse furnishings, a small wooden table with 2 mismatched chairs, a threadbare couch that had once been green, but now existed in some indeterminate shade between brown and grey, and a stone fireplace whose blackened interior suggested years of use. "For whose place is this?" she asked, her voice barely audible even in the stillness. Jack moved to the fireplace, kneeling to arrange kindling from a nearby basket. "Was my father's. Now mine, I suppose, though I haven't been here in years." He struck a match, the sudden flare illuminating the deep valleys of his scars for just a moment before he touched it to the kindling. Small flames licked hesitantly at the dry wood, gradually growing in confidence and strength. Clara sank onto the couch, her knees finally giving way. Now that they had stopped running, if only momentarily, the full impact of her situation crashed over her like a physical wave. Her hands covered her face as silent tears slipped between her fingers. Jack stood awkwardly by the growing fire, his own ghosts seemingly awakened by the cabin's familiar shadows. After a moment, he moved to a small cupboard and returned with a dusty bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses that had clearly not been used in years. "It's not much," he said, pouring a finger of amber liquid into each glass, "but it might help." Clara accepted the drink with unsteady hands. The first sip burned its way down her throat, spreading warmth through her center. The second sip was easier, and with the third came a slight dulling of the razor's edge of fear she'd been balancing on for days. "He discovered I'd found the documents," she said suddenly, staring into the depths of her glass. "About what the company was doing with those experimental drugs." Her voice trembled but grew stronger with each word, as if finally speaking the truth aloud was releasing some terrible pressure. Turner Bioresearch was supposed to be developing treatments for rare childhood diseases, but they were skipping safety protocols, falsifying data, using terminally ill children as guinea pigs without proper consent. Jack's face had gone completely still, the flickering firelight casting his features in stark relief. "What kind of treatments?" he asked, his voice unnaturally flat. Clara took another sip of whiskey before answering. "Experimental gene therapies. They targeted children with progressive conditions, kids whose parents were desperate enough to try anything." Her eyes lifted to meet his. The official documentation claimed minimal side effects, promising outcomes. But I found the real data. Over 80% of the children experienced catastrophic immune responses. Some died within days. Others lingered for weeks, suffering. Her voice broke on the last word. Jack had gone pale beneath his scars, the glass in his hand forgotten. "When?" he demanded. "When did these trials take place?" Clara blinked at his intensity. "The files I found dated back 3 years, but the program might have been running longer. The most recent trials were conducted at Riverside Children's Hospital about 8 months ago." The sound of glass shattering cut her off. Jack had dropped his drink, the amber liquid spreading across the worn wooden floorboards like spilled blood. His eyes had taken on a haunted, hollow quality that sent a chill through Clara, despite the growing warmth from the fire. "My daughter," he said, his voice barely recognizable. "Emma. She was at Riverside 3 years ago. Progressive muscular dystrophy." His hands had begun to shake. "They offered us a miracle trial, a new gene therapy that could halt the deterioration. When she started getting worse instead of better, they said it was her disease progressing naturally." Clara felt the blood drain from her face as understanding dawned. "Jack, I'm so sorry, I didn't know—" "She died," he continued, as if Clara hadn't spoken, lost in the grip of memory. "While I was fighting the insurance company to cover treatments they claimed were experimental. My wife couldn't handle it. The grief, the medical bills piling up. She took sleeping pills a month after the funeral. I wasn't home, fighting a warehouse fire on the east side." The crackling of the fire filled the silence that followed his confession. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the world in white silence. Clara found herself unable to speak, the enormity of the coincidence, or perhaps fate, rendering her momentarily mute. Jack moved to the window, peering out at the storm. His profile against the darkness seemed carved from stone. "All this time," he murmured, "I thought it was just bad luck, a trial that failed, part of the risk we accepted." His hand curled into a fist against the window pane. "But if what you're saying is true, if they knew—" A distant sound interrupted him, the mechanical growl of engines approaching through the forest. Jack instantly switched from grieving father to alert protector, extinguishing his flashlight and moving quickly to douse the fire. "They're coming," he whispered, pulling Clara to her feet. "We need to move." "Wait," Clara said, clutching his arm. "The documents. You deserve to see them." She reached into her purse, fingers finding the hidden compartment where she'd concealed the USB drive. "Everything's here, all the evidence of what they did, the falsified safety reports, the real outcomes, the names of the children." Her voice softened. "Emma might be in these files." Jack stared at the small drive in her palm, a universe of answers contained in its plastic shell. For a moment, the approaching danger seemed to recede as he confronted the possibility of finally understanding what had happened to his daughter, and who was responsible. The sound of vehicles grew louder, accompanied by the crunch of boots on snow. Jack's jaw tightened as he took the drive and pocketed it. "There's a cellar," he said, moving to a worn rug in the corner and pulling it aside to reveal a trap door. "My father built it for storage, but it'll hide us, if we're lucky." The hinges protested as Jack lifted the heavy wooden door, revealing a ladder descending into impenetrable darkness. Clara hesitated only a moment before climbing down, the rough wood of the ladder rungs biting into her palms. Jack followed, lowering the door quietly above them. In the perfect darkness of the cellar, with only the sound of their breathing and the muffled approach of their pursuers above, Clara felt Jack's hand find hers. His grip was strong, anchoring her in the void. "Whatever happens," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear, "they can't get those files. Too many families deserve answers." Clara squeezed his hand in silent agreement as the sound of boots on the porch steps echoed through the cabin above them. The hunt had reached its quarry. Darkness enveloped Clara and Jack in the hidden cellar beneath the cabin floor. The space was cramped and smelled of earth, old potatoes, and forgotten things. Clara's fingers involuntarily tightened around Jack's hand as dust tickled her nose, threatening a betraying sneeze. Jack responded with gentle pressure, a silent reassurance in the absolute blackness. Above them, the cabin door crashed open. Heavy footsteps, at least 3 sets, moved methodically across the floorboards. Each step sent tiny particles of dust raining down on them from between the wooden slats. Clara closed her eyes, though it made no difference in the pitch darkness, and focused on controlling her breathing, shallow and silent, just as Jack had whispered instructions moments before. "Clear the main room," a man's voice commanded. The voice was cultured, almost bored with the slight lilt of a New England prep school education. "Check for any signs of recent activity," another voice responded, this one deeper, rougher. "Fire's been lit recently. Embers are still warm." "They can't have gone far then," the first voice said, "especially not in this storm." Flashlight beams swept through the cracks in the floorboards, creating thin strips of light in the cellar's darkness. One beam passed directly over their huddled forms, but the narrow gap provided insufficient illumination to reveal their presence. Clara held her breath until her lungs burned. The sound of objects being moved, cushions flipped, and cabinets opened filled the small cabin. Jack's body tensed beside her when something glass, likely the fallen whiskey tumbler, crunched under someone's boot. "Sir," a third voice called, "found something." Silence fell as footsteps converged toward whatever discovery had been made. Clara felt Jack's hand slip from hers as he shifted position slightly, moving toward the ladder with glacial slowness. "It's her coat," the cultured voice observed, "and look what was in the pocket." Clara's heart plummeted. She remembered removing her coat when they'd entered the cabin, draping it over one of the mismatched chairs. But what had been in the pocket? Her mind raced through possibilities. Her company ID, the cabin key, something else that might... "The napkin from the diner," the voice continued, an edge of cruel amusement creeping in. "Socorro. Quite dramatic, Ms. Williams." Jack froze beside her, and Clara could almost feel the waves of tension radiating from his body. The man knew her name. The reality of how thoroughly they'd been hunting her crashed over Clara with renewed force. "She's still trusting strangers," the voice continued. "First the waitress, now someone else. The tire tracks outside show 2 people arrived, not 1. "Want us to find this accomplice?" the rough voice asked. "Oh, I'm counting on it. After all, anyone helping her is just as guilty of corporate espionage." The methodical search continued, growing closer to the concealed trapdoor with each passing minute. Clara's hand found Jack's arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve as the footsteps approached their hiding place. The rug had been hastily replaced over the trapdoor, but it wouldn't withstand scrutiny if the searchers decided to check beneath it. Jack's breath tickled her ear as he leaned in to whisper something so faint she almost missed it. "When I move, be ready to run." Before she could process his meaning, a new sound interrupted the search, the crackling static of a radio, followed by a voice reporting from outside. "Sir, we've found a car hidden behind the woodpile. Blue Honda Civic, Ohio plates. Excellent, the cultured voice responded. Run the plates and keep the perimeter tight. They're here somewhere. They can't have gone far on foot in this weather. The flashlight beams converged near the fireplace, away from the trap door. In that moment of distraction, Jack reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew something Clara couldn't see in the darkness. A faint scraping sound followed, then the unmistakable sulphurous scent of a struck match. "What are you?" Clara began to whisper, but Jack silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. The tiny flame illuminated his scarred face for just a moment before he tossed the match toward the far corner of the cellar. To Clara's astonishment, it landed on what appeared to be an old rag, which immediately caught fire. The flame quickly spread to several cardboard boxes stacked nearby. "Old hunting supplies," Jack whispered, already moving toward the ladder. "My father always kept extra ammunition down here. It'll buy us time." Clara's eyes widened in understanding. As if on cue, the first box erupted with a sharp crack, followed by another. Above them, the men's voices raised in alarm. What the hell was that? Sounded like it came from below. Jack was already halfway up the ladder, pushing against the trap door with enough force to send the rug sliding across the floor. The sudden movement and noise startled the searchers, creating precious seconds of confusion. Jack emerged from the cellar like a demon from the underworld, backlit by the growing fire below. "Run!" he shouted, pulling Clara up behind him. "Out the back window!" One of the men recovered quickly, lunging toward them with outstretched arms. Jack met him with a shoulder to the chest, sending the man stumbling backward into his companions. The distraction was enough for Clara to make it to the small window on the cabin's rear wall, which Jack had unlatched while she was climbing from the cellar. The ammunition continued to explode below, creating a chaotic symphony that was joined by the crackling of flames that had begun to spread from the cellar to the main cabin floor. Smoke filled the small space with astonishing speed, obscuring vision and burning Clara's lungs as she struggled to force the window open wider. "Stop them!" the cultured voice commanded, now tinged with genuine anger. A gunshot rang out, the bullet embedding itself in the window frame inches from Clara's head. Jack grabbed a chair and hurled it toward the armed men, then bodily pushed Clara through the now open window. She tumbled into a snowdrift, the shock of cold momentarily stealing her breath. Jack followed an instant later, pulling her to her feet and toward the trees as more gunshots split the night air. Behind them, orange flames had begun to consume the cabin, casting their desperate flight in hellish light that reflected off the snow in bloody hues. The irony wasn't lost on Jack. Once again he was running from a fire, only this time he had set it himself. They plunged into the forest, the deep snow hampering their progress, but also covering their tracks as it continued to fall. The sounds of pursuit faded slightly, the confusion of the burning cabin working in their favor, but they both knew the reprieve was temporary. Men like those hunting them didn't give up easily. "There's an old logging road about half a mile east," Jack gasped, pulling Clara deeper into the woods. "If we can reach it, we might have a chance." Clara stumbled forward through the snow, her city boots entirely inadequate for the terrain. Her lungs burned from exertion and lingering smoke, but a new kind of determination had taken root inside her. The men who had just tried to kill them were the same ones who had experimented on innocent children, who had contributed to the death of Jack's daughter. "We have to expose them," she said between labored breaths, "no matter what happens to us." Jack didn't answer immediately, his focus on creating distance between them and their pursuers. But when he finally spoke, his voice carried a conviction that matched her own. "We will," he promised, guiding her around a fallen tree. For Emma. For all of them. The forest swallowed them into its snowy depths as behind them, the cabin, the last physical connection Jack had to his father, collapsed in flames against the night sky, a funeral pyre for memories he had never properly mourned. Dawn crept reluctantly across the snow-laden Ohio landscape, painting the eastern sky in washed-out watercolors of pale pink and muted gold. After hours of trudging through the frozen forest, Jack and Clara had reached the promised logging road, now little more than a narrow, overgrown path barely visible beneath the fresh snowfall. The storm had finally abated, leaving behind an eerie stillness, broken only by their labored breathing and the occasional distant crack of a snow-burdened branch giving way. Clara's entire body ached with a bone-deep weariness. Her fashionable boots, designed for office corridors rather than wilderness survival, had long since surrendered to the elements. Each step was a negotiation with pain, as wet socks rubbed blisters against frozen toes. But the physical discomfort paled in comparison to the gnawing fear that pursued them as relentlessly as Turner's men. "Not much farther," Jack said, his voice hoarse from cold and exertion. His face, already severe with its landscape of scars, had taken on an almost ghostly pallor in the early morning light. Only his eyes retained their intensity, fixed on some point ahead that Clara couldn't yet see. They crested a gentle rise, and Jack paused, gesturing toward a structure nestled against a stand of ancient oaks. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than an abandoned barn, its weathered red paint peeling away like scabs from the grey wood beneath. A sagging roof drooped under the weight of accumulated snow, and one of the large double doors hung askew from rusted hinges. "What is this place?" Clara asked, her breath forming small clouds that dissipated quickly in the frigid air. Jack's expression softened slightly, memory temporarily overtaking vigilance. "Old Weaver's farm. Been abandoned since I was a kid. My father used to bring me fishing at the pond behind it." He pointed toward a frozen expanse just visible through the trees. "Later I brought Emma here. She loved watching the frogs in summer." Clara followed him toward the dilapidated structure, noting how he automatically moved to the side of the hanging door rather than testing its noisy hinges. Inside, the barn was surprisingly intact. Shafts of early sunlight penetrated through gaps in the wooden slats, illuminating dancing dust motes and creating strips of gold across the dirt floor. The air smelled of old hay, ancient manure, and the particular musty sweetness of a space long abandoned by humans, but occasionally visited by wildlife. Jack moved purposefully toward the back corner, where a rusted tractor sat partially covered by a tattered canvas tarp. Behind it, nestled against the wall, was a small wooden chest secured with a simple padlock. "You've been here recently," Clara observed, noticing that while dust covered everything else, the path to the chest showed signs of disturbance. Jack nodded, kneeling before the chest. "After Emma died, after Sarah..." He couldn't finish, the names of his lost family catching in his throat like physical objects. Instead, he focused on the lock, producing a small key from the inner pocket of his jacket. "I needed somewhere to keep the things I couldn't bear to see every day, but couldn't bring myself to throw away." The lock opened with a protesting click. Jack hesitated, his hand resting on the chest's lid as if gathering courage. When he finally lifted it, Clara couldn't suppress a small gasp. Inside lay a carefully organized collection of childhood treasures: a well-loved teddy bear with one eye missing, several colorful hair ribbons, a child's watercolor set with most colors still untouched. But dominating the collection was a stack of letters, their envelopes in various shades of pastel, some decorated with stickers of butterflies and rainbows. The handwriting on each envelope showed the progressive deterioration of fine motor skills, starting with careful, childish printing and ending with nearly illegible scrawls. "Emma wrote these during her treatments," Jack explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "One every day. Said it was her job while in the hospital to document everything so she could help other kids someday." With reverent care, he lifted the stack and selected one from the middle. Its pale blue envelope crumpled slightly at the corners from frequent handling. Clara sat beside him on an overturned milk crate as he unfolded the lined paper inside, covered in purple ink. "Dear future doctors," Jack read aloud, his voice steadying as he channeled his daughter's words. "Today is treatment day now at 12. The medicine burns going in, but Nurse Patty puts ice on my arm and tells me jokes about penguins. My legs feel tingly afterward, like TV static. Mom says that means it's working, but Dr. Stevens looks worried when he thinks no one is watching." Jack paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "Dad brought me a new book about a girl detective. I'm going to read it tonight if the headache doesn't come back. The headaches are the worst part. They make the lights too bright and sounds too loud. I told Dr. Stevens, but he wrote something down without answering me." Clara felt tears gathering, but remained silent as Jack turned the page. The girl in the room next door cried all night. Her name is Lily, and she has the same treatments as me. But her hair is already falling out, and mine isn't yet. I gave her my pink scarf to make her feel better. Mom says I'm brave, but I'm scared too. I just don't tell them because it makes Mom cry in the bathroom when she thinks I can't hear. Jack's voice finally broke on the last line. I'm keeping track of everything like a real scientist. Maybe it will help someone figure out why some kids get better and some don't. Love, Emma Turner. He carefully refolded the letter, his hands trembling slightly. There are 63 letters, the last one... He shook his head, unable to continue. Clara gently took the letter, returning it to its envelope before noticing something she hadn't seen before. A small logo embossed on the corner of the hospital stationery, a stylized double helix wrapped around a letter T. Her blood ran cold. Jack, she whispered, pointing to the logo. Look. Jack stared at the insignia, confusion giving way to dawning horror. Turner Bio-Research, he murmured, tracing the emblem with his fingertip. But that's impossible. Emma was treated at Riverside Children's Hospital, not a private research facility. Clara reached into her purse with shaking hands, withdrawing the USB drive. The files I discovered showed that Turner was operating inside established hospitals. They were using legitimate medical facilities as covers for their experimental treatments, paying administrators to look the other way. She hesitated, then added gently, Jack, what was your wife's maiden name? A muscle twitched in his scarred cheek. Turner. Sarah Turner. His voice had gone flat. No relation to Robert Turner as far as I knew. It's a common enough name. Clara said nothing, waiting as Jack pieced together the implications himself. You're suggesting... he began, then stopped, the possibility too monstrous to voice. With deliberate movements, Clara extracted another letter from the stack, this one on official hospital letterhead. Her eyes scanned the document, then widened. Jack, this is the consent form for Emma's treatment. The authorizing physician is Dr. Robert Turner. The temperature in the barn seemed to drop further as Jack stared at the signature, recognition dawning in his eyes. That's why Sarah was so insistent on Riverside, even though Cincinnati Children's had a better reputation for pediatric neuromuscular disorders. She said she had connections. His voice had taken on a hollow quality. I never met the doctor. I was always working when he made his rounds. Jack, Clara said carefully, what was your wife's relationship to Robert Turner? Jack's face had gone completely still, the scars standing out starkly against skin that had lost all color. They were cousins. Distant, she said. They'd reconnected at her father's funeral a year before Emma got sick. Clara felt sick as the puzzle pieces clicked into place. The company keeps its experimental subjects within a closed circle. Children of employees, relatives, people who can be controlled or silenced if something goes wrong. Jack stood abruptly, the letters falling from his lap onto the dirt floor. Sarah killed herself because of guilt, he whispered. Not just grief. She knew. Outside, a branch snapped, the unmistakable sound of a footstep in crusted snow. Jack instantly reverted to survival mode, gathering the letters with swift efficiency and returning them to the chest. Someone's coming, he warned, already moving toward a small door at the barn's rear. We need to go now. As they slipped out the back entrance into the brightening day, Clara realized that Jack had kept one of Emma's letters, folding it carefully into his inner pocket. Small, devastating evidence of a betrayal beyond comprehension. Morning sunlight illuminated the outskirts of Millfield, Ohio, giving the small town a deceptive postcard quality. Clara and Jack watched from the cover of pine trees that bordered the municipal parking lot, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp December air. After hitching a ride with a sympathetic truck driver who had asked no questions about their disheveled appearance, they had arrived back in civilization, though Clara wasn't sure if that improved their safety or compromised it. Jack's face had hardened into something unrecognizable since discovering the truth about Emma's treatment. The revelation that his own wife had delivered their daughter into the hands of Robert Turner had transformed his grief into something darker, more volatile. Clara could almost feel the rage radiating from him in palpable waves. "I should have known," he said, his voice so low Clara had to strain to hear it. "All those nights Sarah spent crying on the phone. I thought she was talking to her mother about Emma's condition, but she was talking to him." Clara placed a hesitant hand on his arm. "You couldn't have known, Jack." He didn't acknowledge her touch, his eyes fixed on the Turner Bioresearch Facility that dominated the east side of town, a gleaming six-story building of glass and steel that looked wildly out of place among Millfield's modest brick structures. The corporate logo, that same stylized double helix from Emma's hospital letters, crowned the building in illuminated blue-white brilliance. "I'm going in there," Jack stated flatly, not a suggestion but a declaration. Clara's grip on his arm tightened. "That's suicide. The place will be crawling with security, especially after what happened at the cabin. They'll be expecting us." "Not us," Jack corrected, turning to face her for the first time since they'd arrived in town. "Just me. You're taking the evidence to the authorities." His plan had seemed logical when he'd first outlined it during their journey back to town. Clara would take the USB drive to the FBI field office in Columbus, while Jack created a diversion at Turner Bioresearch. Simple, efficient, except for one crucial detail that Clara couldn't accept. "You're not planning to come back," she said quietly. Not a question. The muscle in Jack's jaw twitched, his only tell. "I have nothing to come back to, Clara." For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of 3 years' grief and one day's revelations hanging between them like a physical presence. Clara studied Jack's profile, the proud line of his jaw, the scars that testified to his willingness to walk into fire to save others, the new determination in his eyes that frightened her more than Turner's men ever could. "I can't let you do this," she finally said. Jack's laugh held no humor. "You can't stop me." "Maybe not," Clara conceded, "but I can offer you a better plan." She withdrew her phone from her pocket, displaying an email she'd composed during their ride into town. "I've prepared everything, all the evidence, all the names. One click and it goes to every major news outlet in the country, plus the FBI and the Department of Justice." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Why haven't you sent it already?" "Because once this goes out, there's no controlling the fallout. Turner has connections everywhere, judges, politicians, police. We need leverage first." She nodded toward the imposing building. "We need to confront him directly, record his confession and then release the evidence. That way, no matter who he pays off, the public will know the truth." Jack studied her face, searching for weakness or deception and finding none. The hardness in his expression didn't soften exactly, but something shifted, a recognition of a kindred determination. "When did you become the strategist?" he asked. Clara thought of the endless nights she'd spent agonizing over how to expose Turner's operation without destroying herself in the process. "Around the same time, I stopped being just an administrative assistant and became a whistleblower," she answered. Jack nodded slowly, his decision made. "All right, but we do this my way." He gestured toward a modest clothing store across the street. "First, we need to change our appearance. We're too recognizable." 20 minutes and nearly all their remaining cash later, they emerged looking like different people. Jack had purchased a pair of non-prescription glasses and a business suit that disguised his firefighter's physique, slicking back his usually tousled hair with water from the store's bathroom. Clara wore a dark brown wig, conservative clothing, and makeup that altered the appearance of her cheekbones and eyes. "Remember," Jack cautioned as they crossed the street toward the Turner building, "we're Dr. and Mrs. Anderson from the Oversight Committee. We have an appointment with Dr. Turner regarding the Riverside trials." Clara nodded, adjusting the fake ID badge they'd created using a hotel printer and laminating supplies from a stationery store. Her heart thundered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady, steadier than they'd been since this nightmare began in Maple Diner. The interior of Turner Bioresearch was aggressively modern, all white surfaces, blue accent lighting and glass partitions that created an illusion of transparency while revealing nothing of substance. The receptionist, a young woman with artificially brightened teeth and a practiced smile, greeted them with professional warmth. "Dr. and Mrs. Anderson, We weren't expecting the oversight committee until next week." A slight crease appeared between her perfectly shaped eyebrows. "Last-minute schedule change," Jack replied smoothly, his voice taking on the clipped, authoritative tone of someone accustomed to deference. "Dr. Turner was informed yesterday." The receptionist's fingers danced over her keyboard. "I don't see it in the system, but Dr. Turner is actually in the building today. Let me call his assistant." As she reached for the phone, Clara felt panic rising in her chest. If they were discovered now, they'd never make it past the lobby. But Jack maintained his composure, leaning slightly over the reception desk. "Perhaps you could try his direct line. He specifically mentioned avoiding the usual channels given the sensitive nature of our visit." Jack lowered his voice conspiratorially. "It concerns the Riverside situation." The effect was immediate. The receptionist's professional demeanor faltered for just a moment, her eyes widening slightly before she regained control. "Of course, Dr. Anderson. One moment." She dialed a different number, speaking in hushed tones. After a brief conversation, she looked up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Dr. Turner will see you immediately. 15th floor, the elevator requires keycard access." She handed them visitor badges. "These will get you up there. His assistant will meet you at the elevator." As they crossed the lobby toward the bank of elevators, Clara whispered, "That was too easy." Jack's expression remained impassive, but his eyes scanned continuously for threats. "No, it wasn't. She knows exactly who we are." The elevator doors closed behind them, and Jack immediately pressed the emergency stop button between floors. He turned to Clara, his expression deadly serious. "This is a trap. Turner is expecting us." Clara felt her stomach drop. "Then why are we still going up?" "Because it's the only way to end this," Jack replied, removing the thumb drive from his pocket and handing it to her. "If anything happens to me, get this to the authorities." Before Clara could protest, he released the emergency stop and the elevator resumed its smooth ascent. When it opened on the 15th floor, they were greeted by a sleek corridor and a man in an impeccable suit, whose face Clara recognized instantly, the same security officer who had followed her at Maple Diner. "Dr. and Mrs. Anderson," he said, his cultured voice laced with mockery. "Dr. Turner is eagerly awaiting your inspection." He led them down the corridor to a set of double doors at the end, opening them with a flourish to reveal a spacious office dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Millfield and the surrounding countryside. Behind an imposing desk of glass and steel sat Robert Turner himself. Clara had seen his face countless times on company materials and news interviews, but nothing had prepared her for the cold intelligence in his eyes as they swept over her disguise with amused contempt. He was younger than she'd expected for someone of his professional standing, perhaps early 40s, with the kind of conventional handsomeness that came from expensive haircuts and tailored clothing rather than actual distinction. "Ms. Williams," he greeted her, not bothering with the pretense that her disguise had fooled him. Then his gaze shifted to Jack and something flickered in his expression, surprise quickly masked. "And Jack Turner. What an unexpected family reunion." Jack took a single step forward, his voice deadly quiet. "Hello, Robert. It's been a long time." Turner smiled, though the expression never reached his eyes. "Not since Sarah's funeral, I believe. You made quite a scene accusing the doctors of negligence. If only you'd known the truth then." Clara looked between the two men, confusion momentarily replacing her fear. "You knew each other before?" "Oh, he didn't tell you." Turner's smile widened fractionally. "Jack isn't just married to my cousin. We grew up together. Jack Turner, the heroic firefighter, always saving women in distress." His tone hardened. "Still playing the same old games, I see." A week had passed since the confrontation at Turner Bioresearch headquarters. The morning dawned clear and cold over Maple Diner, where Emily Martinez wiped down table 12 with practiced efficiency. Christmas music played softly from the vintage jukebox in the corner, barely audible over the clatter of dishes and morning conversations. Through the window, Emily could see fresh snow beginning to fall, each flake catching the sunlight like tiny crystal ornaments. Her world was largely silent, had been since childhood meningitis had stolen her hearing, but Emily had learned to read the visual rhythms of the diner like a complex musical score. the twitch of a customer's hand reaching for more sugar, the slight forward lean of someone about to request their check, the furtive glances of the young couple in booth 3, clearly on a first date. All these details composed the silent symphony of her workday. Today, however, Emily found herself distracted, her gaze repeatedly drawn to table 12. A week ago, a desperate woman had written "Socorro" on a napkin, setting in motion events that had dominated national news for days. Emily had recognized the Portuguese word immediately. Her grandmother had been Brazilian, and though Emily had never mastered spoken Portuguese, certain written words remained etched in her memory. The subsequent FBI raid on Turner Bioresearch had been televised live. Impossible to miss even in their small town. The footage showed agents escorting executives out in handcuffs, including the company's founder, Robert Turner. Special press conferences detailed the horrific experimental treatments performed on terminally ill children without proper consent or oversight. The story had everything: corporate greed, medical malpractice, family betrayal, and whistleblower heroism. Yet in all the coverage, one particular detail nagged at Emily. No one had mentioned the scarred man who had helped the blonde woman escape that day. His face hadn't appeared in any of the news reports or press conferences. It was as if he'd vanished into the ether after playing his crucial role in the drama. Emily knelt to pick up a fallen napkin beneath table 12, her fingers brushing against something wedged in a narrow crack where the floor met the wall. Curious, she worked it free, discovering a crumpled, stained napkin, the original one she realized with a start. The word "Socorro" was still visible, though faded and blotched with coffee stains. But beside it, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, someone had written in small, precise letters, "She's free now, thank you, Jay." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She ran her thumb over the message, wondering when Jack, that was his name, she'd overheard it that day, had returned to leave this token. Had he come during her day off? Had he deliberately sought out her section of the diner, knowing she would eventually find it? The bell above the door jingled, drawing Emily's attention to a new customer entering. The blast of cold air that accompanied them momentarily fogged the diner's windows, creating a brief curtain of mist that dissolved to reveal a woman Emily instantly recognized, despite her changed appearance. Clara Williams looked different from the terrified woman who had fled the diner a week ago. Her blonde hair was now cut into a stylish bob, and she carried herself with a quiet confidence that hadn't been present before. She scanned the diner briefly before her gaze settled on Emily, a smile of recognition warming her features. Emily watched as Clara made her way to the counter, choosing a stool directly in her section. When Emily approached, Clara signed a simple "thank you" with surprising fluency. Startled and touched, Emily responded with her own quick signs, asking if Clara was okay. The conversation that followed, partly in sign language and partly with written notes, revealed fragments of what had happened after their escape from the diner. Clara explained that the FBI had placed her in protective custody until the initial arrests were complete. She'd testified before a grand jury 2 days ago, and formal indictments against Turner and his associates were expected by the end of the week. The evidence on the USB drive, combined with additional documentation discovered during the raids, had been damning beyond dispute. Emily hesitated before signing the question that had been haunting her. What about the man with the scars? Something flashed across Clara's face, pain perhaps, or unresolved grief. She scribbled on her notepad. Jack didn't make it out. Emily's hands stilled, a cold weight settling in her stomach. She'd feared as much when his face hadn't appeared in any of the coverage, but having it confirmed made the loss suddenly real. Clara continued writing. There was a confrontation with Robert Turner. Jack discovered Turner was his cousin's former lover, and that they had deliberately selected Emma, Jack's daughter, for the experimental treatment that killed her. Emily's eyes widened at this revelation. The national news had mentioned unethical selection of test subjects, but had not detailed this particular cruelty. When security broke into the office, Jack tackled Turner, giving me time to escape with the evidence, Clara wrote. The last I saw, they were struggling near the windows, then I heard a gunshot. Emily's gaze dropped to the napkin still clutched in her hand, the mysterious message taking on new significance. She showed it to Clara, whose face paled as she recognized the handwriting. "That's Jack's writing," she whispered, the words visible on her lips. Emily pointed to the date stamp printed at the bottom of the napkin, yesterday's date. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "He's alive?" The diner's door jingled again, this time when Emily looked up, her breath caught in her throat. Standing in the entrance, surveying the room with cautious eyes, was Jack Turner. He looked thinner than before, and a fresh bandage peeked from beneath his collar, but he was unmistakably wonderfully alive. Clara hadn't yet noticed him, still staring at the napkin in disbelief. Emily reached out, gently turning Clara on her stool to face the door. The moment Clara saw him, time seemed to freeze. The bustle of the diner, the Christmas music, the clinking dishes, all faded into the background as two people who had faced death together locked eyes across a crowded room. Jack moved toward them slowly, favoring his left side slightly. When he reached Clara, he simply stood there as if uncertain of his welcome. "They said you were dead," Clara finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The FBI couldn't find you after the shooting." "I couldn't risk staying," Jack replied. "Not until I was sure Turner wouldn't wiggle out of this somehow. Not until I knew you were safe." Emily watched their reunion with a bittersweet smile, clutching the napkin to her chest. She couldn't hear the words they exchanged, but she could read the emotions written plainly on their faces: relief, joy, and something deeper taking root between two people forged in shared trauma. On the television mounted in the corner of the diner, a news report showed footage of Robert Turner being led into a courthouse, his expression one of cold defiance despite the handcuffs. The caption scrolling beneath him announced that additional charges of attempted murder had been added to the growing list of crimes attributed to the disgraced pharmaceutical executive. Emily turned her attention back to table 12, where Jack and Clara now sat together, their hands intertwined on the tabletop. She approached with coffee, setting down 2 mugs with silent efficiency. Jack looked up at her, recognition and gratitude in his eyes. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the table, a small butterfly pin, identical to the tattoo on his daughter's wrist. "For Emma," he mouthed clearly, making sure Emily could read his lips, "and for everyone who helped bring her justice." Emily nodded, understanding flowing between them without the need for sound or further explanation. As she moved away to give them privacy, she felt the weight of the napkin in her pocket, a simple paper square that had changed so many lives with a single word. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Maple Diner and the small town in a blanket of pristine white, nature's way of offering a fresh start, a clean page on which new stories could be written. Sometimes, salvation begins with a single word written in desperation. Clara's simple act, writing Socorro on a napkin, sparked a chain of events that exposed corruption, brought justice to countless victims, and forged an unbreakable bond between two wounded souls. It reminds us that even in our darkest moments, when we feel most alone and powerless, reaching out for help can change everything. What would you have done in Clara's position? Would you have found the courage to risk everything to expose the truth? Jack Turner's journey teaches us that our deepest wounds can become our greatest strength. Despite losing everything, his daughter, his wife, his faith in humanity, he still chose to help a stranger in need. His scars, both visible and invisible, didn't harden his heart, but instead made him uniquely capable of recognizing another's pain. If faced with the truth about who was responsible for your greatest loss, would you choose vengeance or justice? Could you find the strength to transform personal tragedy into purpose? If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing these powerful narratives to life. The greatest honor you can give us is to share this story with someone who might need its message, someone who may be facing their own moment of crisis, wondering if anyone would notice their silent cry for help. Remember, sometimes the most profound acts of courage begin with the smallest gestures of compassion.